We're now joined by Alpesh B.Patel from Perfinium Partners for our newspaper review. Welcome. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Le Figaro and the big story, the election in France. I don't know if you watched it, but at some point you could almost hear the Rocky music as they were walking in into the studio.
You could hear the Rocky music.
At least somebody could hear it. But you had the French president wide-eyed, finger pointing. He knew this was his last opportunity, and Monsieur Hollande would not back down. It was quite a debate.
Well, Monsieur Hollande obviously feels he's in the driving seat. It's his to lose. I don't actually see it that way, and the reason is if you get enough of the Front National voters moving across to Sarkozy, so sticking to the right, I don't see them moving from one end of the political spectrum all the way to the other, then he could come in, even though I think President Sarkozy comes across, I think many in the French media would say, comes across a bit of a Marie Antoinette figure, somebody who comes across very extravagant, because when he first came into office, that's exactly how he was portrayed, especially with his extravagant-looking wife, if I can put it that way. And of course, then you get moments of austerity and so on. It's just the wrong impression. I think there's definitely a perception problem, but there's also a problem about how are you going to get the growth. I think this is what Monsieur Hollande's problem is going to be.
Constantly arguing over the German economic model. Who knows it better? How should it work in France? But given that just a few days left, and as you point out, the votes from the National Front, from the right wing, are important. Can Mr. Sarkozy pull it off within, 48 hours or so?
I think you could have a surprise if you don't just simply look at his personal following. If you get enough of those right-wing movers. Now, the problem is that Ms. Le Pen, the ruler of the Front National, has said she's actually going to abstain. She's going to submit a blank ballot. Now, of course, if enough of her followers do the same, then Monsieur Hollande wins. But I'll be looking for a political upset, because it's always more exciting with politics when you do have that kind of a surprise.
Well, let's continue talking about this. We're looking at some pictures now of the great debate. I mean, it was 3 hours long. That is not a short debate by any means, for them both to be on top form. And the European Voice very much focuses on François Hollande, who we can see there, and it talks about the fact that Van Rompuy, who's the president of the European Council, is sent letters to saying, look, come to an informal dinner, please, at the end of May, at which they hope to bring Hollande, if he does win on Sunday, into the fold and prevent a renegotiation of the treaty.
Yeah. The bottom line here is what the EU is trying to do is ensure that austerity and control over budget deficits remains in place. The fear with Monsieur Hollande being socialist is that there'll be a big ramp up in public spending in order to try and
But also
boost
he
growth.
has specifically said as well, hasn't he, as part of his campaign, that he will renegotiate that fiscal treaty.
And in his campaign, Barack Obama said he'll get rid of Guantanamo Bay. You can promise anything and everything you want, but the power won't actually end up residing in your own hands, because you have certain treaties already in place, and he's going to be sitting around that dinner table, and there's going to be a lot of pressure put upon him. I don't think he's going to be renegotiating the fiscal compact. I think what will end up happening is that he will think, and he'll try and enact policies where increase in public spending to try and boost growth. The problem with that will be he'll get pressure from the ratings agencies, who I suspect if he wins within 6 weeks to 2 months will downgrade France's sovereign debt rating, which will increase the cost of borrowing for France, and that will soon put a paid to public spending for growth.
For France, just to chuck a quick fact in, paying off its debt is its second biggest expense on its public expenditure, the interest rate on its debt. But anyway, I'll just throw that in there. Moving on, Colin.
Let's move on to the Times. And the first time in 70 years that you've had the central bank governor speaking publicly about some success, some failure, of course, and admitted that there had been failures in managing the economy and the situation that led to the collapse and to the recession a few years back. I mean, what is interesting is that, yes, he said we did make mistakes, but he assigned blame clearly to Mr. Gordon Brown, to Ed Ball, saying that, well, it's because they refused to allow us to regulate the banks. The new laws prevented us from doing our jobs.
Yes, what he's actually saying is, if only I was king and ruled the country. Yes, exactly. If only I was the real king, I could have sorted out the economy, but my hands were tied. Actually, he goes beyond that. He says we made mistakes and he has regrets. I can't understand why he said this, because actually the reality of the matter is, at that time, if you were arguing that banks didn't have enough capitalization, that's what he's saying, they were too indebted relative to the capital reserves they had, were he in charge, it would have stayed exactly the same for the very simple reason the global banking sector as a whole didn't have enough capital reserves. And there's no way you were going to be able to say to the banks which he was regulating that we want you to become uncompetitive to your American peers and shore up adequate capital, because they all measure themselves on return on capital, say, no, 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 we want you to increase your reserves, lend less, generate less economic return. He wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have got away with it.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing anyway, isn't it? And to actually quote him, he said, you know, I should have shouted from the rooftops about the dangers that were building up specific to Northern Rock. Why do you think he's saying this now?
I don't know. Maybe it's...
Well,
this is what I can't
office,
understand. First of all, it's nonsensical, because he wouldn't have done that, and he could have shouted from the rooftops anyway. And secondly, even if the Bank of England was regulating on capital adequacy, well, the FSA was doing it. They were regulating on capital adequacy. Why would it have made a difference if he was doing it? And he would have had a pushback from the banks and the politicians saying, you're not going to make these banks less efficient, because I remember the time, less efficient, and reduce their profitability by asking them to reserve more capital. It wouldn't have happened that way.
Let's move on to The Guardian, Politics USA, and apparently some of Mitt Romney's people are a bit upset with Prime Minister Cameron because he's been cozying up to Barack Obama. It does seem a little petty, some would say.
But it was a very chummy visit, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you know, how this affects votes in Nebraska, they didn't explain.
You've got to show your love if you want the relationship to remain special between the two countries. What's funny about this is somebody from the Romney camp has said that the British Prime Minister showed a lack of experience, was not very skillful, and was taken for a ride by the Obama administration. I think that's Romney's camp getting a little bit carried away with all of that as well. I think they should have just kept quiet in the Romney camp about this, because again, a little bit like Monsieur Hollande, they've got it to lose in a way. Because they've already won the nomination pretty much on the Republican side. The battle's really against President Obama. Attacking us over the pond in Britain really doesn't play in US domestic politics, which, as we know, is notoriously insular anyway, and nobody in the US cares.
Did you have a pin-up?
I did. Warren Buffett.
Come on, Alpesh.
Warren
really
Buffett was your pin-up. Original picture of Marilyn Monroe.
The Sage of Omaha was your.
I had all my revision timetable schedules up on the wall, and as I say, an old picture of Marilyn Monroe. I should get that on air as well, in case people think I am completely crazy.
You've got me cracking up. Warren Buffett pin-up. That's the first I've heard of it. You know.
I wonder if that's the first he's heard of it. I don't know.
Alpesh always brings something new. Alpesh B.Patel, Perfidion Partners. Many thanks for coming in. That's all we have for you on our newspaper review. From Sally and me for now.
Bye-bye. See you soon.